Housing activists say Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana shouldn't have slashed grant funding for municipalities and provinces at the expense of poor people. He announced the cuts during his medium-term budget policy statement last week. Activists say he should rather have cut from the bloated cabinet and the blue light brigade transporting and protecting ministers. Ayesha Ismail reports.
The cutting of grant funding to municipalities across the country will have dire consequences for those in need of housing. While the tightening of belts is required during South Africa's current economic crisis, poor people should not be punished for corruption and fruitless and wasteful expenditure perpetrated by those in power.
It does mean that we will have to either cut or delay some of our housing projects. Those housing projects are almost entirely funded by national grants. There are two main grants that fund housing projects, and not only just housing projects, but upgrades to informal settlements. And it's really unacceptable and indefensible to cut those as your primary focus of budget cuts, to cut those grants. And the reason for it is quite simple, because it's easier to cut grants down at levels of government that you don't have to deal with directly as the finance minister, rather than cut the budgets of your cabinet colleagues who sit directly across the table from you.
He says the cuts have mostly been at provincial and local government level, the ones who deal with bread and butter issues.
We had all heard the warnings about the dire financial situation in the country that the government faces. I understand that's a very real situation. There must be cuts. But if you are going to implement cuts, you must do it in such a way that protects spending on the poor.
Now that's devastating for the majority of people that have been waiting for housing. I think it's very important that government and the national minister address the question of wasteful expenditure before anything else. I mean, we cannot be cutting proper budget that is meant to be servicing our people. The government ought to have cut from the blue light brigades that we have, that is transporting ministers, and also that huge cabinet. There needs to be quite very important conversations that are had around the magnitude of that cabinet. Do we need that many ministers? Do we need that many deputy ministers?
There are fears that even bigger cuts will come with the main budget in February next year. Ayesha Ismail, Cape Town.